All right, Shalom. I want to start by giving our praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who teach and rule well, and also to their elders, the men that taught them. I pray the Lord have peace, blessings, and mercy upon the households of the hopeful elect. This is the brother Shema Wan from the Great Millstone Houston Church. And today I want to go into a lesson touching on what IUIC was going into about having sex on the Sabbath. You know how they said since the temple is not here. How did he say it? He said, well, since the temple is not here, pretty much we don't have to be under that burden of disciplining ourselves from abstaining from sex on the Sabbath. And the video is right here. I'm going to put it in the comment section, Lord willing, when the video uploads. But you could hear it for himself. You know, they go into pretty much justifying having sex on the Shabbat. Where, let's go to the topic. I got a few precepts. So from the title it says, or from the title of these notes, abstaining from having sex on the Sabbath is moving in the spirit. And that's something important to understand, you know, especially coming from the background that we have, you know, having no understanding of these scriptures at one point in time, not having the names of the Lord, nor understanding the will of the Lord. All right. Now coming to the point of growing in this truth and growing in understanding, which goes hand in hand with mortifying the members of this body. You know, cutting off certain things, certain desires, certain acts, lusts, pleasures in the flesh that aren't necessary, all right, for our spiritual growth. And having sex on the Sabbath isn't beneficial to, you know, our spiritual growth or honoring the Sabbath. So real quick, I just want to get a few precepts, and Lord willing, it'll be edifying. It says, this is Romans 8:5. It says, for they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against the Most High, for it is not subject to the law of the Most High, neither indeed can be. And that's what we face dealing in this flesh. You know, moving according to the flesh, having thoughts that, you know, pretty much just move to the ways of the flesh, being carnally minded, which is contrary to the law. All right. Or I should say how it said, for it is not subject to the law. Yes. So it won't be, it won't naturally be under the rule of the law. Us being in this sinful flesh or these vain bodies. How does it say in Romans 8:20? You know, let me go to it. Being subject to vanity. I don't have to get it for time's sake. But let's keep reading. It says, for it is not subject to the law of the Most High, neither indeed can be. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please the Most High. And this is one of the examples of being in the flesh, wanting to, you know, get the desires of, you know, how it feels to have intercourse, you know. So let's go to Exodus chapter 20:8. Speaking of the Sabbath, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And that's no, you know, there's no way around it. To be holy is to be separate. Matter of fact, let's look up that word. Let's go to Exodus 20. You know, the Sabbath is supposed to be honored. All right. So Exodus 20:8. Let's look that word up for holy. Kodash, H6942. To consecrate, sanctify, prepare, dedicate, be hallowed, be holy, be sanctified, be separate. What else they got? To be honored, to be treated as sacred. It says, that's pretty much it. To keep oneself apart or separate. To be observed as holy. All right. And the act of sex makes you unclean. That's not a way to honor the Shabbat. Because it tells us in Isaiah 58 and verse 13 in the NLT, it says, keep the Sabbath day holy. All right. So how do we keep the Sabbath day holy? Pay attention to this. This is what you do not do. This is what you try not to do. It says, don't pursue your own interests on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath and speak of it with delight as the Lord's holy day. All right. And that's putting that into effect is how you, become separate and keep it holy, because not everybody is keen, to the will of the Lord. Not everybody moves to, the commandments of the Lord and what pleases him. All right. Because they move in the flesh. They're not operating in the spirit. They're not setting their affections on, the heavenly things. All right. Which is to come. So why would you purposely, move a certain way that, how should I say it? Understanding how it's going to be, right? The law is going to be implemented on this earth, and we're going to be moving according to the law in its perfection. So knowing that, why would you purposely and intentionally not apply the right ways now? It just doesn't make sense. In keeping in mind, I'm talking about what the IUIC were teaching, especially because they push the law. You got to keep the law, even details like you got to wear your fringes and you're going to be saved by keeping the law. They teach those things. But when it comes to being, how does it say, or how should I say it? When it comes to restraining yourself from your desires and pleasures on the Sabbath day, as far as having sex, they tell you that it's okay. They won't put that burden on us. All right. Because it's too hard to abstain from. No. So going back to the scripture, it says, keep the Sabbath day holy. Don't pursue your own interests on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath and speak of it with delight as the Lord's holy day. It says, honor the Sabbath in everything you do on that day, and don't follow your own desires or talk idly. All right. So the things that are pleasing to the flesh, the things that, we desire to do, if it's on the Shabbat, if it ain't got nothing to do, with keeping the Sabbath holy, in the business of the Lord, even the words that we speak, just being carnally minded, and all the conversations when it comes to being carnally minded don't have to be wicked. They don't have to be evil. It's just, put it like this. If it ain't in season or in the spirit, how we're supposed to be on the Shabbat, it ain't necessary. And that's something to grow in if you're not there yet. And just thinking about how it was for me coming in, whenever I first started learning about the Sabbath at first, well, really before I came across GMS, when I knew I was an Israelite and, I started learning about the laws. Yeah, I honored the Sabbath. I knew about the Sabbath, but the understanding of keeping it holy wasn't all the way there, because I used to think you could have sex on the Sabbath. But now learning about, growing more in the spirit and putting away fleshly desires and the ways of this world, that's where you mature and grow in the spirit, which it takes discipline, where you have to deny yourself if you really want to follow Yahweh Shah. All right. But yeah, that's it. So it's not a day of your own desires and interests. All right. It's a day to delight in the Lord's holy day. And for an example, how the Lord was about to, make his presence unto the nation of Israel, he commanded, well, let me just read it. He commanded the men to separate themselves and not to lay with their women. All right. So they can be holy and separate. But Exodus chapter 19, and I'm going to read verse 9 through 11, then verse 14 through 15 in the NLT. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will come to you in a thick cloud, Moses, so the people themselves can hear me when I speak with you. Then they will always trust you." Moses told the Lord what the people had said. Then the Lord told Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival." It says, "Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothes." It says, "Be sure they are ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch." All right, so preparing themselves, all right, for the Lord. Now jumping down, it says, "So Moses went down to the people." It says, "He consecrated them for worship, and they washed their clothes. He told them, 'Get ready for the third day, and until then, abstain from having sexual intercourse.'" That's how they were supposed to prepare themselves, to get ready for the Lord, for what the Lord was about to do. Because intercourse, sex with your woman makes you unclean. Sex, period, makes you unclean. The release of semen makes us unclean. That action makes us unclean. Let's go down to 1 Samuel 21. All right. And something that was said on the behalf of IUIC, making it seem like if the temple was here still, then it wouldn't be okay to have sex on the Sabbath. But since the temple ain't here, it's okay, and we don't have to be so disciplined now. That doesn't make sense. We can't pick and choose, what we desire, what's too hard and what's not. The scriptures tell us we're rehearsing the righteous acts, and understanding we're not going to keep it perfect because we're in the hands of our enemy. We're in the land of our captivity, when we're oppressed. But abstaining from having sex on the Sabbath, that's something that we can have self-control over, have temperance over. That's not the same as like we got to eat defiled foods where we get our food from. We don't know what they do to it and where it's coming from. That's different. Not having sex on the Sabbath, that comes with discipline and growing in the spirit. That's not something where it's like, well, we're not going to hit you with that burden because that's too heavy. No, that's given. Matter of fact, before I read that, let's go to Sirach. Where is it? Ecclesiasticus chapter 32 and 19. Because this is what that sounds like. Sirach 32 and 17. It says, "A sinful man will not be reproved." All right. Let's look up that word reprove. A sinful man will not be reproved. It says reprimand or censure. Let's get a better definition. Let's see. It says to scold or correct, usually gently or with kindly intent. So somebody that doesn't like to be corrected. All right. To express disapproval. Okay. To express disapproval. It says to disprove, refute, some synonyms. But yeah, that's it. So a sinful man, how did it say? A sinful man will not be reproved, be corrected. All right. It says, but findeth an excuse according to his will. All right. So it could be fitting where you won't be in the wrong. And that's what they're doing. They're twisting up the doctrine. They're twisting up, they're making wrong seem right and right seem wrong. All right. And the scriptures told us about that. 2 Peter 2 and 1, it says, "But there will be false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privately or who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, such as having sex on the Sabbath. It says, even denying the Lord that bought them. And even speaking about IUIC, they know, they teach the law, but it's like you don't even know the name of the Lord. As much as you claim to know the Lord, you don't even know his name nor push it. That doesn't make sense. But it says, and even denying the Lord that bought them and bringing up themselves swift destruction. So at least they repent. This is their destiny. It says, and many shall follow their pernicious ways. They got large numbers. They got a great multitude. The wide and the broad follow those ways that lead to destruction. Then it says, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. And that's what you have today with these camps teaching false doctrines. That is not light, because the scriptures tell us we ought to acknowledge the ways of the Lord to avoid punishment. All right. But for those who the Lord are dealing with, you're going to abstain from doing certain things like that and, grow more and get built up more in the ways of the Lord, which will lead to you moving less in the flesh and more in the spirit. But 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 4 through 6 in the NLT, it says, and this is, I'll just read it. It says, we don't have any regular bread, the priest replied. This is whenever David was hungry with the men that he was with. All right. It says, but there is only holy bread. King David was on the run. All right. With the men that were following him, and they became hungry, and they came to a priest. Right. So it says, but there is only holy bread, which you can have if your young men have not slept with any woman recently. All right. Just showing you why, because the act of intercourse makes you unclean. All right. And mind you, they're in the tabernacle at this moment. All right. It says, don't worry, David replied. I never allow any men to be with women when we are on a campaign. And since they stay clean, even on ordinary trips, how much more on this one? Since there was no other food available, the priest gave him the holy bread, the bread of the presence that was placed before the Lord in the tabernacle. It says it had just been replaced that day with fresh bread. So, that was an account. You're showing you that question came up. Why? Because sleeping with women makes you unclean. And the IUIC is teaching that you can be unclean or you can have sex on the Sabbath. All right. Real quick. Let's get Leviticus 15 and 16 in the NLT. It says, whenever a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his entire body in water, and he will remain ceremonially unclean until the next evening. So showing you the act of sex makes you unclean. That was pretty much it. Yeah, let me see. It was another precept that I was thinking about. No, that's it. I'll end it there. But yeah, having sex on the Shabbat, that's that's not the right way to go. You should be being built up in, fighting against the flesh and the desires of the flesh, and sacrificing and making your body a living sacrifice for the Lord. However we could be better. But having sex on the Sabbath, no, that's going off. All right. And it's a lot of people following those ways that they're teaching, and it's going to lead to them being destroyed if they continue to follow those ways. But I'll end it there, and I'll, Lord willing, post the video in the comment section. So again, I want to give our praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who teach and rule well. And Lord willing, until the next time I say shalom.